vast majority of African Americans who have ever lived and died in this country never had the chance to be what they might have become, never had the chance to be able to pursue the strengths and the talents that were within them. We had 246 years of enslavement. That's 12 generations. How many greats do we have to add to the word grandparent to begin to conceive of how long slavery lasted in this country? It was before there was a United States of America. And then that was followed by another 5 generations of Jim Crow restrictions that, again, like I said, was not overturned until within the lifespan of many, many people alive today. So the idea and the prospect of African Americans being folded into the mainstream of American life is a very, very new proposition. We're sort of at the beginning, the adolescence of folding in an entire group of people who had been held outside of the body politic for so long. So this great migration was the first time in our country's history that people who had been held in a fixed place at the very bottom of the hierarchy signaled that they had options and were willing to take them. Secondly, this great migration is the first time in our country's history that people who had been assigned to the very lowest rung in our country's hierarchy and the Jim Crow caste system, it was the first time in our country's history that the lowest caste people actually had the chance to choose for themselves what they would do with their God-given talents and where they would pursue them. Think about those cotton plantations, and those rice plantations, and those sugar plantations, and those cotton fields. On those cotton fields and on those rice plantations and on those tobacco fields and sugar plantations were opera singers, jazz musicians, playwrights, novelists, surgeons, architects, journalists, professors, all kinds of engineers, all kinds of people. How do we know that? We know that because that is what they and their children, now their grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren have often chosen to become once they had the chance to choose for themselves what they would do with their God-given talents and where they would pursue them. Think about what was lost to this country as a result of an entire group of people not being able to live out the strengths and the talents that were within them. Think about the vast majority of Black people who've ever lived in this country not being able to build upon the God-given talents and strengths that were within them. It's unfathomable what we have lost, and it can never be retrieved because it's past, the people are gone, and there's no way to know what might have happened. I'm inspired by the quiet power and bravery of the ancestors of virtually everyone in this room who had to have participated in some kind of migration, because for much of our country's history, many, many people were rural. So even just migrating to the city could be a big, big leap of faith for many people. But I'm thinking about the people who were migrating from across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, and across the Rio Grande, and then across the rivers and oceans that would, rivers and mountains that would take them from the south to the north and the west. And it requires us to think about those people in our background and our lineage who were part of some migration. And that means that we have to imagine a young person at a dock about to board a ship that's going to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. Or there is a young person who is loading up a truck that's going to cross the Rio Grande. Or there is a young person who is standing at a railroad platform about to cross rivers and mountains to get them to the north, or merely from one county to another, or from the rural countryside to the big city, wherever they happen to be. And there with them are the people who raised them. Their mother, their father, their aunt, their uncle, their grandparents, whoever it might have been who had gotten them to that point. And those older people were not going to be able to make the crossing with them. Migration throughout history is a young person's endeavor. If any of us know the people who were part of a migration, whatever that migration might be, if you do the genealogy, you'll often find that people were leaving when they were in their teens or early 20s. It's a young person's endeavor. And so as that young person in our backgrounds was standing at that dock, or loading up that truck, or at the train depot, had to look into the eyes of the person who had raised them. And they had to recognize in that moment that there was no guarantee of when they might ever see them again, or if ever they would see them again. Remember, there was no Skype, no Zoom, no texting, not even reliable long-distance telephone service. And even if there had been, many of the people that they were leaving didn't even have telephones. So this was going to be a complete break from all of the people that they had known and all of the people that they had loved. That is the nature of the sacrifice that had to have occurred somewhere in all of our families. And I'm convinced that the people in our backgrounds who made that heartbreaking sacrifice or decision did not make those decisions so that their descendants would be at war with one another. I'm convinced that that is not why they were doing what they were doing. I think that they went with all of the hopes and dreams and faith that life might be better for both themselves and their descendants. I emphasize that this was a leaderless movement. That's one of the beauties of it. I mean, that's where the power of it comes, because it means that there are leaders and heroes in every one of our families. Every one of our families. I think we spend far too much time looking outside of ourselves, looking outside of our families, looking outside of our communities for celebrity, for fame, for someone else outside of our worlds who we want to look up to and elevate. And I think that we need to be looking inside ourselves, looking inside our families, looking inside our lineage, and to recognize that there are heroes in every single one of our families that we can learn from. I think there's actually a study out of the University of North Carolina that it indicated that when young people are exposed to the history, not just history with a capital H, but the history of their families, of how their ancestors, their grandparents might have found a way to survive under difficult circumstances. How did they survive the Depression? How did they survive World War I? How did they survive Jim Crow? When they are able to see a direct connection between their family, people they actually knew, and history, and how they survived that history, or the challenges of that history, that they actually have higher self-esteem, their grades improve, they have a sense of their connection in the world, because they can see the continuum between how their ancestors had survived and how they can survive now. That means that it's focusing in on the heroes within our own families. That's one way I want to look at it. So I was inspired by my parents. I don't look to outside. I don't look to other people for to uphold over other people. In fact, the focus of the Warmth of the Suns was on regular, everyday people. I could have done a lot on celebrities, or many, many celebrities who were part of the Great Migration, as I mentioned a few of them before. Their stories will get written. They'll do memoirs, other people do biographies of them, but regular, everyday people who did this amazing thing without recognizing how the magnitude of what they were doing, that deserves its own story. That deserves its own recognition. They were heroes by my definition because they did a very brave and courageous thing. Anyone making a decision at that time had to make a courageous thing. To go or to stay equally were courageous, because there were consequences to whatever the decision might have